And we talked with Lisa Dion, who is head chef for this enterprise. So let's see what's cooking at For Kids Who Cook. With me is Lisa Dion of
For Kids Who Cook. We're a cooking school. We teach cooking classes specifically for children. We teach classes for kids 3 and up. So from 3 to 5 years old, we do a preschool class. And then as soon as the children turn 6, we do what's called all by myself cooking. So the children will come into classes and do it a drop-off situation.
Okay. All right. So what would be the differences other than the fact that the older people would be doing it on their own?
Actually, there are a lot of differences between teaching children in the preschool range than teaching children who are, in the older category. We actually teach the same recipe all week long. What changes is the way that we teach the recipe. So for the really small children, like the preschool class, we practice a lot with measurement and counting. We practice with colors and shape and taste. So if we're measuring 1 cup of flour, we may use 2 half cups of flour in order to allow them to duplicate the measurement process. With older children, of course, we're trying to teach them to read the recipe. We're trying to teach them to use their mind to eat first, so to think about the recipe and how the flavors might combine together. We teach them to use their palate quite a bit, so they're tasting quite a lot as they go. But there are actually quite a few things that change. Hand positions and knife positions. Really small children are learning how to hold a spoon or a fork properly. And so we'll actually take the hand, our hand, and put it over the top of theirs and reverse their position on a fork sometimes. With older children, they have that concept down, but what they might be learning is the difference in wording between, say, a whisking motion or a scrambling or something like that.
And 2 things I would imagine you focus in on is safety as well as nutrition.
Yeah, we focus on both safety and nutrition. Safety is a really big thing here. We have specialized gloves for the children who are using knives. We teach the children as young as 3 to practice on what we call a training knife, which other people might call a salad knife. Yeah. But it allows them proper hand position, so that they know and are very conscious of where their fingers are, and they can practice with something that's not going to hurt them before we move them into a sharper knife, somewhere around the age of 10 or 11.
Yeah. How about the nutrition end?
Nutrition. We talk sometimes about whether a food is a fat or a carbohydrate or a protein. We try to get the children to open their minds a little bit about fruits and vegetables, how they're used. We make things more curious for them than at home. Mom and Dad might be saying, eat your broccoli because it's good for you. I'm saying, eat your broccoli because it has a different texture. It offers this amount of water to a recipe, or it has this particular flavor. Notice how it's different from asparagus. So they think a little bit more with their brain before they're putting something into their mouth, and that makes it that much more curious for them.
How complicated do you get on the cooking end?
Every month we have a different theme, and every week we cook different recipes against that theme. This month's theme in October, our theme is Comforts of Home, and every week we're preparing different recipes that are comfort foods, comfort types foods. This week we're making chicken stew, so they're making chicken stew with dumplings. And we've cooked whole chickens, and the children will tear all of the meat off of the bone themselves, so they get that experience. I'm telling everybody that on Thanksgiving Day, if this is something they really enjoy, that the elders of the family will certainly allow them to debone the turkey, because it's not exactly a job anybody wants. Some of them get really grossed out by it. It's not a great feeling on your hands, but others are, really interested. I actually had one little girl who said, doesn't matter to me as long as it's food, that she'd play with it anyway. Right. So we're making chicken stew with dumplings. Last week we made meatloaf and buttermilk biscuits. And we did a little science experiment with the children in order to show them how baking powder and how baking soda work in order to create the rise in the biscuits. So it's a very simple recipe, but we wanted them to really understand the concepts and every ingredient that's in the buttermilk biscuits. that creates the rise. So they learned about the acid in the buttermilk. They learned about the baking soda and how the two of them combine in order to make carbon dioxide, which gets trapped in the flour, et cetera, et cetera. So next week we're making macaroni and trees, which is macaroni and cheese with broccoli. Speaking of broccoli, and we'll be making chocolate cake. We do about one dessert recipe a month. We're actually having an election day workshop, and we'll be preparing humble pie and celebration cake, because we know both will be eaten at one point that day. Now, humble pie is something that they'll actually learn the histories of and the beginnings of. Going back to when the nobles actually used to hunt deer, and they would keep the innards for themselves, which they would use to make pie. Which the innards were called the umbles, and that word has eventually evolved into humble. So they'll learn that, and they'll go through the whole process, and we'll make a pot pie that day. Something a little bit more tastier than I'm imagining innards would be, but they'll get the same basic idea.
What about the size of the groups that you teach?
It's a good question. Depends on the age category. I like to keep the preschool classes to 6 children or less. We have had as many as 8 children here, but we'll put 2 teachers in a class like that. Yeah. For the older children, I like to keep no more than 8 students to a teacher. And I think that that's a really good number for the social aspect, for sharing, for being able to work together as a team. But each child gets the individual attention from the teacher, and the teacher is able to monitor the classroom very closely that way.
Good. What brought this whole thing about?
My 9-year-old daughter, who's now 10, soon to be 11. Lauren came to me and said, after school one day, "Mom, I want to take cooking classes." And I said, "Lauren, I used to be a chef. I'll teach you how to cook." And she said, "No offense, Mom, but I want a real school." And it made me really curious. I went, of course, whenever a child asks for something like that, you go looking. And so I did what everybody else does. I Googled it. And I couldn't find children's cooking classes here in this area. Now, I found other places in the country who were doing the same concept. The more I researched it, the more intriguing it became to me. Yeah. And probably within 3 months, I had quit my job and, kind of set forth the motion of the marketing plan and the research, and just making sure that it was something that was going to fly.
So talk to us a little bit about your background then.
Let's see, I was 23 years old. I owned a gourmet caramel corn company in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I made probably 12 different flavors of caramel corn, which I would distribute to the local area gift shops, which of course in Fairbanks is all you really have is gift shops. So I found a way to hit that market. When we left Alaska, I sold that business, retained the rights for New Hampshire, but sold that business for a couple of other states. And I think that's what gave me really the entrepreneurial bug. And even though I spent 10 years in healthcare, working in healthcare, I always considered myself as an entrepreneur, even within that business. And so I've tried a couple of other things. I've tried probably 15 or 20 or 8 million other things, but I've probably tried half a dozen or a dozen different businesses, and really haven't found one that I loved. And when Lauren mentioned this, it was so intriguing to me. I kind of joked with her for a little while that I would teach the classes. I actually write for Kids Rule magazine, and a few of my customers have mentioned that they've seen our recipes in there. It's a cute little magazine that's distributed to all of the schools. So I practice with some writing for that. We have talked about filming some classes in here for local television, because I think it would be really neat. My company mission is to get kids cooking. Right. And there are a number of different ways for me to do that. One of the things that I'm really interested in is starting junior Iron Chef competitions for the state of New Hampshire, and I'd like to see those held locally. We'll be doing something called food fights in order to really get the ball rolling in that direction.